and cannot find mutual agreement with, so that you can hopefully, water down the differences between them. And the reason I make mention of that is because in my particular proceeding, I come as strictly an inside the music industry economist, and the other people that were hired were academic experts that were rendering testimony based on the facts as they understood them to be. But I was the one who actually could operate inside the business, and I didn't have anybody who could stop me because no one had the same weight of experience. And so what happened in this crazy situation is that I am experiencing what the sound exchange, rate was, the agreement was, and what it meant for the Australian market, but from the ground floor up. And I was getting away with a lot of evidence without being cross-examined. And then finally, just the last second, the attorney, actually a barrister, who finally was exhausted by my appeal, finally got to me, and he said one question in his Australian accent. So he said, "So you're the music man, huh?" Which meant this, so you'll say anything to anyone, referring to the musical. And I said, "I'm not the music man, I'm the music guy." And which gave me some credibility as a lapper.
I'm a music guy too. I listen to music on the radio in my car. One thing I was curious about, I wrote down a whole bunch of questions and you got to them about cars. What fraction of listening to music on the radio is done in the car? Do you have?
Well, we have studies. There's the Ear of Music and other publications that talk about the predominance of that. But we were, and it's the lion's share. But we're looking at trends going forward. The delay of getting a performance right for a sound recording is meeting its inevitable demise as we understand, as John was talking about, the way he operates his car, that there's going to be operational operability of digital devices. Right. Radio's going to have to figure a way to compete with. So whatever it is today, the question really is how long until it's a digital environment, and a radio has to face that future, and have to face the licensing against that.
And you have to be careful with these numbers too, because you can get very different numbers depending on how you treat background music. So obviously somebody may put on something at work and it plays all day, and if you think about the number of songs that are played versus if you have if you're in LA, an hour commute wherever you're going, you have a smaller number of songs but more focused listening, and that can have an effect on what numbers people report in terms of car listening or not.
Right. The other thing, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions outside of radio. Do older people have older cars?
I couldn't possibly answer that.
There must be an answer to the question.
Me. I don't know if that's a personal question or not. I refrain.
I don't know.
Okay, just curious. John, I know you've been very much interested in the use of big data in A&R and in the music industry in general. Are there research projects that can be done without using internal information that record companies have access to?
So it's hard, but there are data sets out there that we've used in various times that are either able to be purchased or are publicly available that could be useful, although not necessarily as informative as ones internally. I mean, obviously, record labels have far more detailed information, or the radio station itself, or streaming services have far more detailed information. And it's a fascinating area, given how much money is at stake and given how much data there now is in this industry. It's actually an interesting component of even like the SDARS case versus, say, the direct licenses that some of the music services have. As part of those direct licenses, they get information and data from, the labels will get data from the streaming services, which is increasingly valuable. And so if you think about what effect that has on the price, they're willing to accept a lower price in exchange for that data, which has value too. But when you think about, and this came up in the context of the satellite proceeding, SiriusXM doesn't have that same information because it's not a two-way service. It's a one-way service when it's in the car. And so if I listen to a SiriusXM station, they actually don't know that. They don't have that information. They don't monitor that they have to get that information about usage from other sources. And so they don't have the same data to give back as part of, say, the rate setting proceeding. And so going forward, and if I were thinking ahead to the satellite proceeding that will occur in 4 or 5 years, I think the role of data will become increasingly, in big data, an increasingly important part of this, of the setting of rates.
And the last question for both of you before we have a little bit of time for questions from the audience is, it sounds like the demand for economists with expertise in this area is only going to rise in the future with additional rate setting cases, with demand from record companies and streaming services for people who could do Moneyball type analysis. The unemployment rate is now below 4%. I don't know how long it will stay that low. Where do you hire people? Do you have any advice for how people should kind of obtain the skills to work in the areas where you work?
I mean, I'll just, before turning over to Barry, the Web 4 proceeding, so the streaming proceeding 2 years ago was a full employment act for economists. I think there was something like 10 expert economists presenting, a number of the most prominent economists in the world. I think there was at least one Nobel Prize winner, if not 2, testified. So, and then they all have teams, et cetera. So, Alan's right. It's a full employment act going forward in terms of these rate setting proceedings, because given the money at stake, it's not surprising. In terms of how to get the experience, it's, you know, these proceedings occur only every so often. So I think one has to generally get 2 types of experience. One is an evaluation type of experience. That's one way to go. The other is just working on industry-related matters. Barry works on all kinds of different of things involving the industry. And so getting that kind of experience then can be valuable, because if you know the data sources that are out there, then know the types of data, that can play an increasingly important role too.
So I think that for the other side of the world, the performing rights organizations that represent both music publishers and songwriters, there's really a dearth of economic expert opportunity, because the dollars tend to go to the other side of the equation, the radio industry, the cable television industry, the network TV industry, the streaming services. So, you know, we don't have that many people to do our fights with. And then there are big consulting firms that get into a state of conflict about if they could, because somebody else on one of their teams may be on the other side. So there is a real need for it, and if you want to know how to do this, is study the markets, get involved in the market sizing of the industries that are traditional industries that are continuing to be licensed, develop some understanding around the market, and align yourself with, you know, one of the performing rights organizations. You could have yourself a very good experience.
That's part of the motivation for forming Mirrors, so that we can get a better understanding of the way the market works. So why don't I see if we have some questions from the audience?
Clean it out.
It's kind of blinding here, but, oh, nope. So I did want to ask a little bit, John, I know you've been involved in antitrust cases, or many antitrust cases. You've also followed some of the legal actions around concerts. Mirror hasn't done that much on live events. I thought when we got started that would be an area where we would actually do more than we've done so far, but we can try to do better in the future. What is your involvement been in some antitrust issues involving promotion of concerts or use of venues, the area in general?
Well, I mean, let me just more think about this theoretically instead of getting into specific matters. Obviously, Alan, in terms of the economics of Rockonomics, was one of the first to really write from an economic perspective about these issues, about the shifting nature of, and the importance of live concert revenue for performers. The issue, there have been a number of these antitrust cases recently involving restrictions that, say, promoters or venues put on musicians. And they raise interesting antitrust issues, but one has to also ask the question of, okay, well, let's suppose somebody agrees to a restriction, that is, an artist agrees to a restriction that's imposed by any of the venues. What effect does that truly have on their ability and sort of on competition and consumers? If they're limited in their ability, say, to perform in a second venue in Los Angeles or in San Francisco or in New York, does that really have a harmful effect on consumers? They entered into it, and how many would have done that anyways? This is very different than restrictions that movies have in terms of around any given movie theater. Oftentimes you don't find movies played or available in close proximity, and there's a reason, because every venue doesn't want to have free riding. They don't want to promote, say, the Rolling Stones, U2, or whomever it may be, and then them to just show up, a month later at another venue where they've spent a lot of money promoting that. And so there's pro-competitive reasons to have these kind of restrictions, and one has to think through those. And so it's not infeasible for there to be a harm to competition as a result of these restrictions. As a matter of theory, these cases often make sense, but it really becomes down to an empirical matter. The question is, does the venue or the collection of venues, as it may be, have the type of market power that can actually harm consumers in some way, result in a degradation in the quality of concerts, or in a reduction or increase in the price that consumers have to pay. And that's the relevant question from an antitrust perspective. It's not just if one venue is harmed, because competition isn't about protecting competitors, but rather about protecting competition itself, which is a different concept.
Thanks. That's an issue maybe we can return to at a future meeting in Mira. Before we take our break, I did want to point out, if you take a look at the chandeliers, the beautiful chandeliers, they actually came from a movie set that you see, Miracle on 34th Street, 1947. You might recognize the chandeliers. So just a nice touch in this room. Josh, you had a question?
I have a question. So last year we saw Pandora start paying under direct deals. Is that a one-off, or is there a trend of services moving away from statutory payment systems and going to more direct deals, even if they have the option for?
The Pandora wasn't the only one who entered into a direct deal. There were others, and so like.
Any direct deal with a major label or with independents, or?
With both. And so I wouldn't want to draw firm conclusions, because to draw inferences on small samples is always hard. But I definitely think that is a trend. I would not. The other way to say this, one would reasonably expect the trend to go to these direct deals. Remember, the royalty setting process is expensive. It's, there's some sense of uncertainty, and to the extent that you can piggyback off of similar deals and use those deals as a benchmark to get certainty and potentially more value, sharing some of the, in essence, the lower transaction costs that would result, you would expect people to do that.
They're allowed to strike a deal on their own even after the board has set the rule.
Well, the other thing is, there's just one more thought on that, John. There are also some non-financial aspects to the direct license, playlist structuring, shifting, that could let an indie label get more prominence on a playlist. So they have maybe potentially other opportunities besides shifting.
Yeah, it serves both parties. And you only enter into a deal if both parties are better off, and these kind of direct deals give something to both parties, and maybe that the service gets to offer a product that they couldn't offer if they went through the copyright process, royalty process, and the label gets either more some kind of commitment or some protections or something else of value to them as well.
That raises one question I did want to ask about you. In an ideal world, if we didn't have the history that we have with copyright board, with non-paying and non-paying performance rights and so on for radio, how would you determine royalty rates? What we could wave a wand and make the market work the way you would like? How would you?
Well, again, we also have not talked about the rate court structure that faces ASCAP and BMI. I have no problem with commercial arbitration in the absence of agreement, but where parties are putting their best foot forward, what I have trouble with is when there's a consent decree court with one sitting judge who may have a predisposition to go one way or the other, and to constantly go before him or her is creating more risk to the outcome. So if we can't resolve these disputes, because we shouldn't be, if we're resolving them, it kind of means that somebody's leaving something on the table. But let's do it in an arbitration process where we get a clear understanding of what the results are, and let's move on.
It's hard to justify the current structure of these rate-setting proceedings as a matter of economics. I think that if one were going to start over, you would hopefully have a more market-based system, and then if markets were to fail, have regulation, or some form of regulation, either through compulsory arbitration or a rate-setting proceeding. But we're stuck where we have this structure. I mean, I wish if we could start over that. I think there would be a much more efficient structure for determining these rates.
Is there a country, this is the last question, and we really will get to our break. Is there a country that does it well? Something of a model?
Not that I've ever experienced.
I don't know one.
Yeah, on that note, we have a 10-minute break, and then we'll reassemble for the last two.